Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Russia in Context. Today, we'll be going over the biggest news stories from Russia that you might have missed if you live abroad or here in Russia if you weren't paying close attention to the news. So let's dive into the Russian week in review for the second week of 2024. In what will likely be no surprise to anyone who followed last week's biggest news event, the main story this week was the continuation of problems connected to public utilities and the political fallout from this crisis. Now, new cities and towns saw outages, while others still have not had heat brought back to their domiciles. It's difficult work, to be sure, and I have to say, some citizens have had their utilities fully restored. However, when putting together last week's video, the bureaucratic finger-pointing had already begun in the Moscow region. Now, specifically, it's in this region because A, it's the imperial core. It's a part of the country where such breakdowns are not expected to happen, and B, the greatest concentration of utility disasters took place there. Citizens were quick to notice that the governor of the Moscow Oblast, Andrei Vorobyov, was markedly absent in the first week of the new year when the outages began to pile up, with rumors quickly making the rounds that he was away, out of country on holiday, someplace warm, not paying any attention to the situation back at home. His office and those of cities and towns in the Moscow Oblast didn't win themselves any PR points in the whole affair either, with citizens receiving impersonal, seemingly automated responses and, in some situations, having the ability to communicate and report outages totally blocked. Vorobyov eventually showed up and held a meeting with citizens, but prevented anyone from filming it. The situation garnered enough attention to warrant Putin stepping in and publicly commenting on it, to say that he was on the case and that everything was now under his personal control, but since then he hasn't done anything with regards to the situation, at least that I've seen written about anywhere. The government prosecutors quickly leveled charges against the owner of a private munitions factory that was the source of heat for the town of Klimovsk that I mentioned last week, as well as the city's mayor, and then patted themselves on the back for rounding up the culprits and nationalizing the privately owned factory. So I guess those two were responsible for all of the outage in the dozens of towns and cities spread across the oblast and the country as a whole? They must be. Now, as a result of this ongoing collapse in public utilities, speculation has grown as to the causes. Now, as I stated last week, many laid the blame on connecting too many newly built housing complexes to outdated Soviet infrastructure, but others have begun theorizing that it may be a byproduct of sanctions, as the machinery and chemicals that the thermal power plants employ are almost certainly from the West and can't be completely replaced in short order. And then there are others who believe government corruption is at fault. Money earmarked in the budget for repairs and expansion of utilities finding its way into officials' bank accounts. Now, as is typically the case for complex situations, it's likely a perfect storm involving all three explanations to some degree, and while the Russian government is likely to issue some official explanation at some point, I doubt it will be a satisfactory one, given the scale of the utilities' collapse. Unrelated aside, I don't think I've mentioned it before, but one of the companies that has been building massive residential complexes, which could be largely responsible for overloading the aged utilities infrastructure across the Moscow Oblast, is a company called Samolyot. The company, in terms of square meters built, is responsible for almost 3 times as much as its closest competitor. In 2023, in the Moscow Oblast, Samolyot constructed 10.3 million square meters, along with millions of square meters in other oblasts and cities around Russia. It is the largest developer on the federal level, and the company just so happens to belong to Maxim Vorobyov, the brother of Alexei Vorobyov, the governor of the Moscow Oblast. But I'm sure that's all on the level and not in any way a nepotic scheme of enrichment. Going back to what I was saying before, I stand by my use of the word collapse. See, I had someone last time who felt that the word wasn't appropriate for the situation, but the definition of collapse is a sudden and complete failure, a breakdown, which is a wholly apt description of what was witnessed here in Russia in the first weeks of 2024. I really hope that this is the last time I will have to talk about this subject, as temperatures are predicted to be warmer in the coming weeks, meaning less stress on the utilities system. Now, all that considered, I do hope that this will see the beginning of reform to these systems and how Russia and Russians approach their utilities. For example, why not require new residential complexes to build their own heating plants on their territory, or install electric heating systems in apartments, or maybe a geo-exchange system underneath buildings, some combination of these things. No matter what the cause of the utilities collapse was, or what form the solution may take, new development and residential construction clearly can't continue as before. If it does, we can almost certainly expect more of the same. Switching now to the justice system, a few stories popped up this last week connected to that. Chiefly among them was the detention of Sergey Udaltsov, a far-left political activist commonly associated with the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, though he has his own organization, the Left Front, which definitely promotes workers, trade unions, socialist movements around Russia and the former Soviet Union. It's a much more Communist Party organization than the official one, which is only communist in name. Anyway, on January 11th, police came to Udaltsov with a search warrant. Udaltsov was taken in, though not formally charged until the following day, when it was announced that he was being charged with defending terrorism, an offense punishable by 2 to 5 years in prison, and which is not clearly defined and can therefore be applied flexibly. For example, if someone were to say something explaining the justifications of a terrorist organization's actions, that could be enough to be charged. Not necessarily supporting those actions or even making them seem sympathetic, simply reasoning why the other side might be motivated to do such things, that's all that's required to land you in hot water. But in the case of Udaltsov, it's even more absurd. See, on Friday, according to Udaltsov, he was charged with defending terrorism because he supported a group of Marxists in the city of Ufa who were detained in 2022 and accused of creating a terrorist organization. Udaltsov, who supported these people before these charges were leveled against them, is not pleading guilty because, as he points out, the quote-unquote terrorist group that he supposedly has defended hasn't even been charged with being a terrorist group as of yet. It's worth noting that Udaltsov has been a fairly vocal critic of some of the Russian government's actions, and in the run-up to Putin's re-election in March, the state apparatus wants everything to be as quiet, as ideal as possible, so it was really just a matter of time before they cooked up some charges against Udaltsov. However, based on the information available, it seems as though they should have let this plan cook a bit longer. Moving along, 3 FSB officers were charged with receiving bribes worth 5 billion rubles, or about $57 million, and one was accused of organizing a criminal group using his official status. All 3 officers were part of a division responsible for hunting out and shutting down corruption in various branches of the Russian government. Ironic, huh? Finally, with regards to the legal system, with the first working Friday of the new year came new additions to the list of foreign agents. Seriously, every week, at least 5 or 6 different individuals and organizations are added to this thing. But I guess everyone's got a quota to fill. This week, the biggest name was Boris Akunin, the famous mystery author whose real name is Grigory Chakhtishvili, and the biggest organization was Holod, an online source of independent investigative journalism with stories all connected to Russia. Now, if you notice the obtrusive text on the screen, that's the text that I have to put up here right now, because anytime you mention a foreign agent, even just speaking their name aloud, according to Russian law, you have to include this disclaimer, which simply states that they are foreign agents, or you yourself can get hit with sizable fines. Now we come to the rapid-fire section of this little broadcast. On January 8th, in Nizhny Tagil, a town about 2 hours north of Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains region. It's famous for being the home of Ural Vagon Zavod, a factory which builds, among other things, military hardware like tanks. And it's also the town where Evan Gershkovich, the New York Times journalist currently being held in Moscow on charges of espionage, he visited that town prior to his arrest to go see Ural Vagon Zavod for a story he was working on. Anyway, in Nizhny Tagil, there was an explosion on the railways, a bomb used to detonate a fuel cistern. The event was classified as a terrorist attack, and police quickly set up roadblocks for all vehicles leaving the region, but as of a week later, no one has been held responsible or apprehended. The representative for the Defense Committee of the Gosduma, Andrei Kartapolov, explained that there will be no relief for those mobilized for the war effort, not even in the form of troop rotations. Regardless of how many contract soldiers sign up, those drafted into the army are in it till the end, whichever version that may take for them. Russia's largest online retailer, Wildberries, had one of their warehouses near Saint Petersburg burned down completely to the ground, a massive structure of 100,000 square meters, about 1.1 million square feet. The blaze happened in the early hours of January 13th when approximately 1,200 workers were busy putting together orders. Now, thankfully, there were only 2 victims, though the company is still trying to reach around 50 workers unaccounted for. The loss to the company is estimated at 17 billion rubles, or around $195 million, and Wildberries has stated that they would compensate companies that had their goods lost in the warehouse fire, though they have since asked companies to forego compensation because Wildberries is having a real difficult time here after the fire. Now, in terms of how damaging the inferno was to the company, the 17 billion ruble loss is equivalent to 1% of the company's total yearly turnover, and although I'm no economist, I'm guessing they'll probably be okay. As to the cause of the fire, that is still being investigated, though authorities are looking into arson. Russians have taken to consuming more red caviar in the last year, plowing through almost 4 tons of the stuff over the holidays alone. Now, once considered delicatessen, red caviar, the food, has become more available thanks to a price decrease, which was tied to increased supply thanks to a nearly record year in production. I know it's not so popular in Europe and North America, but I do enjoy red caviar nowadays, and I certainly helped bolster those statistics over the course of last year. I plan on helping out this next year as well. Finally, on the night from January 13th to the 14th, Russians celebrated Old New Year. And yes, I know it sounds like an oxymoron, but as the Russian Orthodox Church is dead set on using the obsolete Julian calendar for religious holidays, Christmas in Russia is on January 7th. However, according to church tradition, Christmas should come before the New Year, due in part to fasting and refraining from anything more than simple food before, Christmas. However, Russians live on the Gregorian calendar, meaning that New Year falls on the 31st of December. Honestly, the only people who should really care about Old New Year are devout Christians who observe their fasting during the actual New Year, so that they can maybe let loose a bit after Orthodox Christmas. But let's be real, most people, but especially Russians, will use any excuse for a drink and a celebration. In fact, just this last week, a member of the Gosduma proposed making Old New Year an official holiday, though such motions are relatively common and typically just pass by the wayside. That said, if you weren't familiar with the concept of Old New Year before, just realize that it opens up the possibility of celebrating any event twice, once on the actual date, and then again 2 weeks later in accordance to the Julian calendar. You can have 2 birthdays, 2 anniversaries, 2 Halloweens, 2 Thanksgivings, whatever you want, no matter what common sense might tell you. There you have it. Another week done. Another video that wound up being longer than I anticipated, even considering the fact that I left out the defrocking of theologian Andrei Uminsky and the death of Sergey Udaltsov, a former employee of Roscosmos who was beaten in prison. I mentioned them in particular because it's entirely likely that I'll come back to them in the future, either thanks to the news cycle or just because those stories deserve additional time and attention. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. In the video description are links for news articles that I used when putting this video together because, sources are important. As always, if you have questions or comments, feel free to share them. And if you found this informative or, God forbid, entertaining, be sure to share it or at the very least leave a like. For now, though, this has been Russia in Context. Thanks for watching.